Hello and welcome to another video. Today, face-weighted normals, baking against itself, as well as comparing the differences between baking against an average weighted normal version of the same mesh. There were some really good conversations happening in the comments on the previous video, so I wanted to just kind of highlight those and show some before and after. We can also look at ambient occlusion and how I perceive ambient occlusion being for mask in Substance Painter versus ambient occlusion in the game engine. Let's check it out. So with this model, if we go and look at the bake mesh maps, what I have is the checkbox use low poly mesh as high poly mesh. So the mesh that's here is being baked against itself, and we've got all of the maps kind of selected. I'll just run this bake real quick and I'll show you the maps as they are. So the ambient occlusion, I'm already seeing issues, but we'll come back to that in a second. This is the main reason I wanted to highlight this. There we've got the curvature map, which is, it just doesn't look, there's not a lot of information there. Position, thickness also has some weird information going on here, and a lot of this has to do, and you can see the normal map is flat as well, because you don't need to be having a normal on there. It's totally fine that is flat. One thing that's going to be important is that the normal map stays flat even when we do bake the other one, and I'll show you how we go about doing that afterwards. But let's go back to the ambient occlusion and just take a look at what's happening here. So of course, there's some baking issues based off of like how I'm unwrapping it, but you can see how you get like a full white range here, and then you get a gray value, and then back to another surface, and there's a pretty harsh edge here. And a lot of this has to do with when you do the weighted normals, right? We're splitting the vertices normal directions, so this face is facing outwards or in the direction of its normal. This one is facing an in-between average between these two, and then this one is facing out, straight out as well. We are getting a little bit ambient occlusion values in here, just as like a product of like how the ambient occlusion is baking. And yeah, this is the problem that I'm not liking. Let me see if I go into the, you don't have any curvature information. The thickness looks very weird as well. It leads to some weird stuff. So if I go back and press M, and let's frame it here. We'll look at the ambient occlusion. So what I've done is in Blender, we've got these meshes. You can see there's some skewing going on here, and all I've done is weighted or I've auto smoothed it to the max value, just so that we have an averaged normal curve along the mesh. And I think if I edit this and highlight the detail here, you can see it's kind of averaged in every direction, right? And we're getting these because this is an n-gon. I mean, if we control T, then you can see where the edges are naturally wanting to go, which is causing some of those pinch points, or these normal lines. We can go back and clean up the mesh if we really want to like try and negate some of that. But from what I could tell with the bakes, it seemed okay. So let's keep going forward. So what I did remove is, originally you were having a weighted normal on here, right? And then you were keeping sharp, and you were increasing the thickness to 100. We're getting it again, I think, because I accepted these edges here. I'll just cut those out. So you can see we're getting a nice smooth normal now, but the problem is when you go to the vertices and you look at the weighted normal direction, you're getting that problem again, where the directions are skewing. So what I've done is, normally it's applied already. So if I control A, we've got the weighted normal on there, and the way to remove it is you go down to the geometry data in the object data panel, and then you just clear the custom smoothing, and then you have that. So what I've done is cleared them all for every piece here, and then we would export this out and bring it back into Painter. So when we go to Painter and you go to Bake Mesh Maps, you can see instead of using the low poly mesh, we're going to point to the non-weighted version before the weighted normals modifier is applied. So we still have the weighted version here, and the high definition mesh is in here. Now, when I was saying earlier that the normals need to be baked from the weighted version and then not in this one, that just means that you uncheck this one, the normals output map, and you should get, let's just bake this, you should get all the bakes that you're looking for without the normal map being affected can see the normal's still flat. But when we look at the ambient occlusion, you're getting a much more predictable ambient occlusion range going on here. I think also curvature looks a little better. There's some information happening here, and I think this is just a matter of trying to clean up the way that the mesh is triangulating, as the way I'm doing it right now with this example mesh is a bit sloppy, so you're getting those pretty harsh lines themselves. But overall, it's much better. And the main reason I want the ambient occlusion to look really good or bake correctly is because if you want to be making masks for this, right, you're going to need those maps to be pretty accurate. That way you can actually use those maps to feed information to your smart masks and like affect the edges correctly without some weird seam happening. The only other thing I wanted to talk about, it's not necessarily related to this, but it seems like it would be a good idea to cover it while we're here, is when you look at an ambient occlusion, it looks pretty good, but there's quite a bit of information in here. And when you're using Unreal, for example, I'm not sure if it's like this in Unreal 5. Please confirm in the comments if you know what is happening. But I remember in Unreal 4, when you go into shadow, that's when ambient occlusion really shows itself. And in direct light, ambient occlusion is kind of turned off. If that's the case, if this asset has values in it like this, right here, it's not white, right? It's some light gray. And if that's the case, we need to be paying attention to what that means for when you're using your asset with ambient occlusion like this. And so the reality is when your asset is in shadow, the overall value of it will be affected by the ambient occlusion. So this area here being a little bit darker than white means that your albedo or your materials in general in shadow are going to be just a little bit darker. So in order to negate that, what I would actually suggest doing is making a fill layer. Let's switch this to ambient occlusion, and just a heads up, you need to have a channels for ambient occlusion in here, which you can just get by hitting plus and then adding the ambient occlusion. What you want to do is add a fill layer, alt click AO so that you're just affecting the AO. I just do it on both, but you'll see here in a second. I'm going to add a fill, and on that fill I'm going to alt click on AO as also. So we're just affecting the ambient occlusion. I know I could put the map here, but I like putting it here. That way if we need to stack anything or add masks and whatnot, we can do stuff afterwards. So this is the ambient occlusion that you're going to have in the engine, not necessarily the ambient occlusion you want when you're using Substance Painter, because you want these gradients for when you're using Substance Painter, but then there's information for the smart mask to play with. But in engine, you're going to want a little bit more of an accurate representation of ambient occlusion. Yeah, so we've got a fill layer. I'm going to click the ambient occlusion and just click the map for it. And if we go, let's just make sure instead of mesh maps, we're going up here to single channel. So this is the affected version. You can add a levels on top of that, and you can move these around in order to affect the ambient occlusion range. So we'll go to ambient occlusion. You can see all the information here, and you can see now we can push this stuff around. So what I would suggest doing is moving this to a range where it's affecting the least amount of areas where you wouldn't want ambient occlusion to happen anyways. You can double click this and actually type it in. So let's like 0.86. You get a little bit of information there, but that's okay. And you can see you're still getting AO in here, and that's good. Now, a full black ambient occlusion means that could possibly affect the albedo to go that much darker, right? And you probably want it to go pretty dark in areas where the ambient occlusion is really kicking in, like in here. But you don't want it to go too dark. So this number I would say is arbitrary to like how you're feeling about it. I would say like let's say like a 0.2 for me feels pretty good, because in post or in your LUT files, you can push those darker areas down more, right? So the idea is it's just like when you're calibrating the levels in your scene to make sure that you're using the full range. This allows you to not clamp your objects in shadow. Just some food for thought. Of course, there's some there's some weird artifacts that are happening in the way that things are baked and whatnot, just because of the way I've UV'd things and how there's some horrible n-gons in here. Yeah, hopefully this is helpful. And I guess that's how to bake with weighted normals in mind. Cool. I'll see you later.